Why is England not a Catholic country? It's a question rooted in power, politics, and personal obsession. This is the story of how one man's desire for an heir shattered centuries of Catholic tradition and changed the fate of a kingdom forever. In 1521, King Henry VIII was a staunch Catholic. He even wrote a book defending the Church against Martin Luther's heresies, earning him the title Defender of the Faith from the Pope. At the time, the Protestant Reformation was sweeping across parts of Europe, challenging the authority of Rome and igniting religious upheaval. But in England, the crown remained loyal to the Pope. Henry stood firmly with the Church, a defender of Catholic orthodoxy, at least for now. Ironically, it would be that same faith Henry would soon break from. But there was one problem: he was married to Catherine of Aragon, and she hadn't given him a male heir. Then came Anne Boleyn, educated in France, witty, charming, and Protestant-leaning. Henry was infatuated. In 1527, Henry asked the Pope to annul the marriage. The Pope refused, fearing Catherine's powerful nephew, the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. Frustrated, Henry turned to Parliament. He began stripping away the Catholic Church's privileges in England. Then, in 1533, with Anne pregnant, he took matters into his own hands. He appointed Thomas Cranmer, sympathetic to Protestant reform, as Archbishop. Cranmer annulled the marriage. The Pope excommunicated Henry. But Henry wasn't done. In 1534, the Act of Supremacy made him head of the Church of England. Now he controlled doctrine, law, and church property. Those who refused to acknowledge his supremacy, like Sir Thomas More, were executed. From 1536 to 1541, Henry VIII dissolved every Catholic monastery in England, seizing their wealth, destroying relics, and scattering their monks. Rebellions like the Pilgrimage of Grace tried to stop him. The Pilgrimage of Grace was a pro-Catholic revolt that began in October 1536 in Yorkshire and spread to the other northern counties. Around 50,000 strong, the rebels under Robert Asker's leadership restored 16 of the 26 northern monasteries that had been dissolved. However, it ultimately failed. Henry crushed the resistance. Catholicism was no longer safe. After Henry's death in 1547, his son Edward VI, who was just 9 years old, took the throne. Under Edward's regents, Protestant reforms accelerated. Latin masses were replaced. Confession became optional. And in 1549, the Book of Common Prayer was introduced, reshaping English worship. Edward died in 1553. His Catholic sister, Mary, daughter of Catherine of Aragon, took the throne and quickly began restoring traditional religion. That autumn, Parliament repealed all of Edward's Protestant laws, including clerical marriage and the Book of Common Prayer, through the first statute of repeal. By December 20th, the Catholic Mass was once again law. A year later, England formally reversed the break with Rome. By the end of 1554, Henry VIII's entire religious settlement had been undone, but full reunion with the Pope still hung in the balance. Then, on the 26th of December, the Privy Council introduced legislation to repeal Henry's religious acts and re-establish papal authority. England was, at least on paper, Catholic once again. In 1558, Mary died and Elizabeth I became queen. Elizabeth I inherited a kingdom in which a majority of people, especially the political elite, were religiously conservative, and England's main ally was Catholic Spain. However, Elizabeth I is a Protestant. She reinstated the Church of England's independence from Rome. The Act of Supremacy gave her control over the Church. The Book of Common Prayer returned. And though Catholic traditions lingered, Protestantism became the law. Over time, Catholicism became equated with treason. Foreign-trained priests were hunted. Rebels were executed. By the late 1500s, being a Catholic priest in England was punishable by death. Gradually, without priests and under pressure, ordinary people stopped practicing Catholicism, and the Catholic faith withered among the lower classes. By Elizabeth's death in 1603, Catholicism had become the faith of a small elite minority. In the century that followed, Catholicism was not just discouraged, it was actively repressed and demonized. Catholics were portrayed as potential traitors, loyal to a foreign pope rather than the English crown. To enforce conformity, the government enacted a series of penal laws designed to stamp out Catholic influence. The Pope-ish Recusants Act of 1593 made it illegal to skip Anglican services, effectively criminalizing Catholic worship. Catholics were banned from holding public office, restricted from owning land, and barred from sending their children abroad for education. In 1678, during a wave of anti-Catholic hysteria sparked by the fabricated Pope-ish plot, Parliament passed the Test Act. This law forced all office holders to deny core Catholic beliefs, like transubstantiation, excluding Catholics from power for over a century. It wasn't until the Catholic Relief Act of 1778 that the tide began to turn. Catholics could now own property, inherit land, and serve in the army, but only if they swore an oath of allegiance to the crown. The 1791 Relief Act granted freedom of worship and allowed Catholics to open schools and chapels again, only if they accepted the Protestant succession to the throne. Full political rights would not come until 1829, when the Catholic Emancipation Act finally allowed Catholics to vote and sit in Parliament, ending centuries of legal discrimination, at least on paper. So why is England not a Catholic country? Because Henry VIII wanted a son. Because Parliament backed his power over the Pope. Because war, rebellion, and political fear turned faith into treason. And because over generations, England was reformed by force, by law, and by prayer into something new. History isn't just about belief, it's about power. And who gets to decide what we believe? Like and subscribe for more content.